He stood in the doorway of the apartment I bought with my own hands. Every stitch, every late night, every skipped meal, and told me to apologize or get out. His wife smiled. That particular smile. The kind that belongs to someone who's already spent the winnings. What neither of them knew was that I had already made one phone call. One quiet, unremarkable phone call that was going to unravel everything she'd spent 2 years building. Oh, bless her sweetheart.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. He stood in the doorway of an apartment I paid for. Every square foot of it, every cabinet handle, every tile in that kitchen, and told me to apologize or get out. That is how Sunday afternoon ended, with my son Marcus looking at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. His wife Priscilla stood just behind his shoulder. She had this smile on her face. Not a big one, just a little curve at the corner of her mouth, barely there. The kind of smile someone allows themselves when they're certain they've already won and they're just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I saw it. She didn't know I saw it, but I did. Here's what happened. We were all gathered for Sunday dinner. Me, Marcus, Priscilla, her mother Dolores, and Priscilla's 2 brothers, Dwayne and Dale. 7 people around a table I'd helped them pick out at a furniture warehouse off Route 53. I remember standing in that showroom thinking the table was too big for 2 people. I bought it anyway because Marcus liked it. Dinner had been fine. Awkward the way it sometimes was when Dolores was there, but fine. Then dessert happened. We were clearing plates when Dolores let out a sound. Not a scream, more like a sharp intake of breath. She pressed her hand to her collarbone and said her sapphire pendant was missing, the one that had belonged to her late sister, the one that was irreplaceable. Everyone started looking around, under plates, along the baseboards, between couch cushions. And then Priscilla said very quietly, "Mama, let me check Josephine's coat." I remember looking up from the floor where I'd been checking near the heating vent and thinking, that's a strange place to start looking. She picked my coat up off the arm of the chair where I'd laid it. She reached into the right-hand pocket and she pulled out a sapphire pendant on a gold chain. The room went still. Marcus's face went red from his collar to his hairline. The veins along the side of his neck stood out like rope. Dolores clutched her chest, both hands this time, and made a sound like she might faint. Dale and Dwayne stood in the archway between the kitchen and the living room with the fixed, blank expressions of men who did not know what to do with their hands. And Marcus said it. His voice came out strange, clipped, like he was biting each word off before he'd finished chewing it. "Mom, apologize to Dolores right now or get out of my house." I stood up slowly. My knees were not steady, but I made them work. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised alone, the boy I had sewn wedding dresses until midnight to put through college, and I saw that he had already decided. He was not asking me to explain. He was giving me a choice between humiliation and exile. Priscilla's smile didn't widen. It didn't need to. I looked at her. I held her eyes for just a moment, long enough to let her know I saw exactly what she'd done. Then I said 3 words, calm, even, slow. "You'll pay for this." I was not yelling. I did not cry. I picked up that coat, the one she just used against me, and I walked to the door. Marcus stood frozen. I think he expected tears, maybe a scene. Maybe something he could point to later and say, "See, she was always like that, he got nothing." Just the sound of the door closing behind me. I did not take the elevator. I walked down 4 flights of stairs in the stairwell that smelled like old carpet and someone's microwaved lunch, and I held myself together through every single step. I made it to the bus stop. I sat down on the bench, and the moment the number 14 came around the corner and the doors hissed open, and I was inside and seated and invisible to anyone who knew me, I fell apart. Hot tears. The kind that come from deep down, not the surface. My hands were shaking so badly I gripped the metal rail just to have something solid to hold on to. An older woman across the aisle leaned toward me and asked if I was all right. I told her yes. "I am fine, thank you." That was the biggest lie I told that year. My apartment was 40 minutes from Marcus and Priscilla's place by bus. 40 minutes I spent watching the city move past the window. A dry cleaner with a hand-painted sign, a corner store with a display of plastic flowers out front, 2 kids on bikes weaving between parked cars. All of it ordinary and indifferent. By the time I got home, the crying had stopped. What replaced it was something harder. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. I let myself in. I hung up my coat. I did not sit down. I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stood at the counter while it heated. My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that fits 2 people if they're cooperative, a living room where I keep my sewing machine by the window for the light. I have lived here for 19 years. I know every sound this building makes. The pipes in the wall behind the bathroom, the particular creak of the 3rd step in the stairwell, the way the radiator ticks when it first comes on in the morning. I know this place the way you know anywhere you have worked very hard for a very long time. I made my tea. I sat at the kitchen table. And I made myself think clearly. Priscilla had not found that pendant in my pocket. She had put it there. That was not a guess. That was a fact I had assembled from the pieces I now had time to look at without Marcus's red face and Dolores's performance in the room with me. The pendant was already in my coat pocket when Dolores reported it missing, which meant Priscilla had done it before dinner, which meant she had planned it before I even walked in the door. I sat with that for a while. The tea went cold. I didn't notice. Then I went to the closet in the bedroom. On the top shelf, behind a winter blanket, I keep a fireproof box. Inside that box are documents, receipts, bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, loan records, a property deed. I pulled it down and set it on the bed and opened it. I was not yet sure what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something. Because here is the thing Priscilla did not understand about me. She saw an old woman with rough hands in a small apartment and a son who didn't look her way anymore, and she thought that was all there was. She thought I was finished. She was wrong about that. Let me tell you something about sacrifice because I don't think people understand what the word actually means until they've done it for long enough that it stops feeling like a choice. My husband Roland died in November of 2001. He was 52 years old. He had seemed fine the night before. He woke up that morning, drank his coffee, complained that his left arm felt strange, and was gone before the ambulance arrived. Marcus was 11. He sat beside me on the curb outside our apartment building while the paramedics worked, and he held my hand so tight I thought he would break my fingers. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. After the funeral, after the last of the neighbors stopped bringing casseroles, I counted what we had. The savings account held $4,200. There was no life insurance worth speaking of. Roland had worked in building maintenance for a company that changed ownership twice in 5 years, and the paperwork had never been what it should have been. I had a sewing machine, a Singer that Roland's mother had left to me when she passed. And I had my hands, and I had Marcus, and that was the entire list. I started sewing, alterations first because that's where the quick money was. Hemming pants, taking in bridesmaid dresses, replacing zippers on winter coats. I put a card up at our church. I left my number at the beauty salon 2 blocks over. Word spread the way it does in a neighborhood where people know each other. The first bridal gown I made from scratch was for a woman on Pelham Street whose daughter was getting married in 6 weeks and couldn't afford a boutique. I charged her $320. I stayed up until 2 in the morning for 5 nights straight to finish it. When she picked it up and her eyes went wide and she grabbed my hand and said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, I went to the bathroom and cried until I had nothing left. That was the beginning. Marcus grew up to the sound of that sewing machine. He used to fall asleep to it, he told me once. Said it was the most reassuring sound he knew because it meant I was still there, still working, which meant we were going to be all right. When he was accepted to Harrington College of Engineering, I sat at this same kitchen table and did the math. The tuition was going to be, over 4 years, with room and board, somewhere around $187,000. I had $62,000 in savings. I had the sewing business. I had a second cousin in Ohio who offered me a small personal loan. I took every bit of it, and then I sewed. Wedding gowns paid the most. Complicated work, exacting work, the kind that would ruin your eyes and your back if you let it, but it paid. I charged $800 for a simple gown and $1,200 for anything with beading. I built a reputation. I had a wait list. 4 years later, Marcus walked across a stage in a rented auditorium and received his degree in civil engineering. I was in the third row. I was wearing the nicest dress I owned, one I had made myself, naturally. And I was crying so hard I couldn't see him clearly until he was almost at the steps. I kept every receipt from those 4 years, every tuition payment, every fee, every book charge, every wire transfer. I keep them in that fireproof box. I don't know exactly why I kept them. Call it habit. Call it the kind of caution that comes from never having had enough. I did not know then that I would need them. In the 2 weeks after that Sunday dinner, I did something I should have done years earlier. I sat down and made a list. Not a grievance list. Not the kind of thing you make when you're angry and you want to prove you've been wronged. A factual list. Dates, incidents, things I had noticed and dismissed. The Christmas of 2019, when Priscilla told Marcus that having his mother over every Sunday was a lot, and maybe they could make it every other week. Marcus had relayed this to me as if it were simply a scheduling issue. I had agreed and felt the adjustment like a small stone in my shoe that I eventually forgot about. The birthday dinner, her birthday or last spring, when she had specifically asked me to bring my black handbag instead of the canvas tote I usually carried, said she thought it would look nicer for the photos. At the time, I had thought, all right, she's particular about appearances. Now I understood why she needed to know exactly which bag I would have with me. The way she talked about her own mother, Dolores was always described as fragile, sentimental, a woman with deep feelings and a history of being taken advantage of. Priscilla had built that narrative carefully, I realize now, so that if anything ever happened, if Dolores ever claimed something, everyone's sympathy would be pre-positioned. Small things, none of them decisive on their own, but lined up in a row, they made a picture. Priscilla had not snapped. She had planned, and she had planned for long enough that the plan had texture and depth and backup positions. I thought about Marcus, my son, who I had watched grow from a child who slept through thunderstorms by pressing his face into my shoulder, into a man I sometimes didn't recognize. He had not become cruel on his own. He had been managed into this position, slowly, carefully, by a woman who understood that the fastest way to separate a man from his mother was to make him feel that choosing his mother was the same as failing his wife. I was angry. I will not pretend otherwise. But I was angry the way you get when you finally understand something that should have been obvious, and you are furious at yourself for missing it as much as you are at the people responsible. I put the list down. I picked up my phone. I called my friend Nora. Nora Ashworth and I have been friends for 31 years. We met when she was a bride, and I was the woman hemming her gown. She is sharp, practical, and allergic to drama, which is probably why we've gotten along so well for so long. She works as a notary now, has an office above a tax preparation place on Caldwell Street. She knows more people in this city than anyone I've ever met, including a real estate attorney named Vivian Marsh, who, according to Nora, was not someone you wanted to be on the wrong side of. I called Nora on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after the dinner. I told her what had happened. I was brief. I stuck to facts. Nora listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Joe, that apartment. What exactly are the ownership documents?" I told her. I had co-signed the original mortgage because Marcus's income alone had not been sufficient to qualify for the amount he needed. I had also contributed $65,000 as a down payment, directly wired from my account to the escrow company, and I had documentation of every cent. So you're on the deed, Nora said. As a co-owner, yes. Another pause. Okay, I'm going to call Vivian in the morning. In the meantime, pull everything. Every document you have relating to that property. Every financial contribution you've made to Marcus, going back as far as you have records. I went to the fireproof box that night. I also called my nephew, Darren. He's 38, works as an accountant for a mid-size firm downtown, and has been quietly skeptical of Priscilla from the day he met her. Something about the way she asked very specific questions about Marcus's salary at the engagement party that had bothered Darren in a way he could never quite articulate. He's methodical the way his mother, my sister, never was. Keeps notes. Organizes everything by date and category. When I told him what had happened, he went quiet in a different way than Nora. The kind of quiet that comes before something specific. Aunt Jo, he said finally, I want to look at Marcus's finances. You still have view access to the property account, right? From the co-ownership? I believe so. I've never used it. Use it. Tonight. Just look. Don't click on anything else. Just look at the transaction history and screenshot everything you see. I asked him why. Because people who set traps like that, he said carefully, are usually running more than one game at a time. Before Darren's thread had time to develop, I went sideways. My neighbor Glenda, who lives across the hall and means well, I want to be clear about that, she genuinely means well, had apparently told her friend Ruth Ann about what had happened to me. Ruth Ann worked at a salon 2 miles from Priscilla and Marcus's apartment and had her ear to the ground about everything in that neighborhood. Glenda knocked on my door on a Thursday night with a very meaningful expression, and the news that Ruth Ann had overheard Priscilla on the phone saying something about a piece of jewelry she'd picked up cheap at a place called Decker's. Glenda was 90% certain this was a pawn shop on Decker Avenue about 4 miles east. I want to tell you that I approached this information with appropriate skepticism. I did not. I went to Decker Avenue the very next morning. The shop was called Decker's Exchange, which I will admit sounds more like a pawn shop than most pawn shops. The man behind the counter had the patient, careful demeanor of someone who spent his days watching people try to get more money than he planned to give them. His name was Earl. I explained, as briefly as possible, that I was trying to trace the sale of a specific piece of jewelry, a sapphire pendant on a gold chain. I described it as precisely as I could from memory, the cut of the stone, the style of the setting, the length of the chain. Earl looked at me for a moment and then said, "Ma'am, I sell about 40 pieces a week." I came back the next afternoon with a photograph I'd found on Dolores's Facebook page from 3 Christmases ago. There she was in Priscilla's living room, wearing the pendant, clear as anything. Earl looked at the photo with mild interest. He let me look at his receipt ledger. $40 for the courtesy, which I paid without complaint. Nothing matched. Not the description, not the date range I was looking for, not anything even close. We went through 6 weeks of records. Earl was thorough and patient because I paid him to be. I drove home on a Friday evening, having spent 2 full afternoons and $40, proving that the pendant had not come from Decker's Exchange. I sat in my car in the parking structure for a few minutes, just sat. Glenda's friend Ruth Ann had heard a piece of jewelry and picked up cheap, and somewhere on Decker and turned it into a pawn shop transaction. People do that. They fill in the gaps with what makes sense to them, and then they pass it on as fact. I called Darren when I got upstairs. "Stop chasing the brooch," he said. "It doesn't matter where she bought it. What matters is what she's doing to the money." He was right. I had spent 2 days on theater. Time to look at what was actually happening. Darren walked me through it on the phone that Saturday morning. Patient, methodical, the way he always is. He said the pendant was a prop. It was designed to produce an event, the accusation, the humiliation, the fracture between Marcus and me. And it had done exactly what it was designed to do. Trying to prove the pendant was planted was not going to be impossible, but it was the wrong place to spend my energy. Because even if I could prove where Priscilla bought it, all she had to say was that she'd bought it as a gift, and Dolores had lost it at the party, and it ended up in my coat somehow. She'd have an explanation ready. She was the kind of woman who always had an explanation ready. "What I want you to look at," Darren said, "is the account." He meant the property management account attached to the mortgage, the joint account that Marcus and I were both technically co-owners of as a condition of the loan structure. I had never accessed it directly. I had simply signed what the attorney put in front of me at closing and let Marcus handle everything from there. I got onto the bank's website that afternoon. My login information was in an old email from the closing attorney. It still worked. What I found was interesting. The mortgage payments were current. That was fine. But there were 3 transfers I did not recognize. One for $4,000, one for $2,800, and one for $6,000 and change. All made in the last 14 months to an account with a different routing number. There was also a credit card listed as connected to the account, a card I had never seen a statement for. I took screenshots on my phone, 7 screenshots getting every transaction on the page. I sent them to Darren. His response came back in about 4 minutes. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Let me do some more digging. Don't touch anything else on there." I closed the browser. I made dinner. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter because I was too unsettled to sit down. It took Darren 5 days to put together a clear picture, and when he called me to describe it, he did so in the careful, neutral tone of a man relaying information he finds personally infuriating but is choosing to present without editorializing. Here is what the financial records showed. Priscilla had opened a credit card in Marcus's name, with his social security number, his income information, his employment details, approximately 22 months ago. Marcus had not known about it, or if he had not looked at the statements. The balance on that card was $11,000. The charges included a 4-night stay at a resort in Scottsdale, ongoing charges at a day spa on the north side of the city, a significant amount at a furniture consignment shop, and dozens of smaller purchases that Darren described as the kind of things someone buys when they're building a life that their husband isn't part of. There were also the transfers I had seen, the 3 from the property account to an outside account. That outside account, Darren had been able to trace through some careful cross-referencing of public records, appeared to belong to a property management company in another state. He couldn't be certain yet what that meant, but it suggested Priscilla may have been funneling money in preparation for something. "She's not just controlling him," Darren said. "She's been preparing to leave, and she's been funding that preparation with his money, and technically with money from an account you're also a party to." I sat with that. "Darren," I said finally, "can you get all of this into a format that an attorney can use?" "Already working on it," he said. "I'm going to compile everything, screenshots, transaction histories, account records, and export it as a PDF. I'll email it to you tonight. Print everything. Keep hard copies." That night, he sent the email. It was 17 pages. I opened the attachment on my laptop, skimmed it to confirm it was all there, and clicked print. My printer made it through 11 pages and then died. Not a paper jam, it simply stopped, the way old machines do, with a blinking light and silence and no explanation. No. And the email account I'd used, an old one I'd set up years ago and used maybe twice a year, was flagged for inactivity by the provider the next morning and locked pending verification. I did not have the backup phone number they were texting the verification code to anymore. That number belonged to a phone I'd replaced 3 years ago. The 11 printed pages were on my coffee table. The other 6 existed only in Darren's email and on his phone. I called Darren to ask him to forward everything to my main email. He said he would. He stepped outside to do it and dropped his phone in the parking lot of the grocery store. The screen shattered. The phone was technically operational. He could receive calls, but the display was black. "The data's still there," he said. when he called me from a borrowed phone. I just can't access it until I get the screen fixed. That's going to be 3 days at the repair place. I stood in my kitchen and breathed through my nose. 3 days. I am not a patient woman by nature. I became a patient woman out of necessity, which is different, and it means I can do it when I have to, but I do not enjoy it. I spent those 3 days doing what I could with what I had. I organized the 11 pages I'd managed to print. I put them in the fireproof box alongside my property records, the tuition payment documentation, the wire transfer receipts from the wedding, $65,000 I had contributed to Marcus and Priscilla's wedding costs, an amount I had never asked to be repaid because at the time I had done it out of love and expected nothing in return. I called Nora and gave her an update. She said Vivian Marsh was ready to move when I had the full documentation together. On the second evening of waiting, I drove past Marcus and Priscilla's building. I did not go in. I parked across the street and sat in the car. There was a moving truck idling at the curb. Not in the loading zone, just idling the way trucks do when someone is making decisions inside. After about 20 minutes, it pulled away without having loaded anything. I didn't know what that meant. I went home. On the third day, Darren called. The phone was repaired. He'd had the shop back up his data first thing. He was sending everything to my regular email right now. I said thank you and sat down at my laptop and waited for the email to arrive. It did. 17 pages, all there. I printed all 17. Then I printed them again. I put one set in the fireproof box and one set in a manila envelope that I tucked inside my winter coat. Then I called Nora and told her I was ready for Vivian. I want to tell you about the phone call I was not expecting because it changed everything. It came on a Tuesday morning, about a week after I had first given Vivian my documents. I was at the sewing machine, alterations for a woman at my church who needed a dress taken in before her daughter's graduation, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Miss Josephine? The voice was young, male, a little uncertain in the way of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say, but is still not sure they're going to say it. Yes, I said. This is Dwayne, Priscilla's brother. I set down the fabric I was holding. Dwayne was the younger of Priscilla's 2 brothers. He had been at the Sunday dinner, standing in the archway between the kitchen and the living room, looking like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. I had thought at the time that he simply found family gatherings uncomfortable. That is apparently not what was happening. I need to talk to you, he said, about what happened, about what my sister did. I asked him why he was calling me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because she did the same thing to me last month. Told our whole family I'd stolen cash from her purse at a birthday party. $400. She cried. She had everyone convinced. And when I said I didn't do it, she cut me off. Told Marcus I was a thief and not to let me near their home. I listened. I knew what she was doing to you the second she did it, he said. I recognized it. Miss Josephine, I have a receipt from a boutique downtown called Lila's Curios. It's dated 3 weeks before that dinner. It's in Priscilla's name on her credit card. The item on the receipt is described as a vintage sapphire pendant on a gold chain. I made myself breathe. Dwayne, I said carefully, how do you have this receipt? I photograph everything, he said. It's just something I've always done. When Priscilla was talking about the birthday party a month before it happened, she mentioned she'd picked up something special for the centerpiece at a place called Lila's. I was there that day. I was in the store with her. She was on the phone with someone and she didn't notice me behind her in line, and I saw what she paid for and I took a picture of the receipt on her behalf to give her in case she needed it. He paused. I don't know why I kept the picture after she cut me off. Maybe I knew somehow. Can you send me that photograph? I asked. That's why I'm calling. He sent it within 30 seconds of us hanging up. I opened it on my phone. A receipt from Lila's Curios, clearly dated. Priscilla Harmon Tate. 1 vintage sapphire pendant, gold setting, $230. I looked at it for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Vivian with a note that just said, "You're going to want to see this." I met Dwayne 2 days later at a diner called Millbrooks on the east side. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the window with a cup of coffee he'd clearly been nursing for a while. He was younger than I'd remembered, mid-30s. He had the look of someone who'd spent years being the quiet one in a loud family. He stood when he saw me, which I appreciated. We talked for almost 2 hours. I'm going to tell you the broad shape of it, because some of the details were his to carry and not mine to repeat. Priscilla was 7 years older than Dwayne. She had been, for most of his life, the person in the family who held things together and made the rules about how they were held. She was not unkind exactly. She was controlling in the way that presents itself as competence until you look at it from the right angle and realize that everyone around it is smaller than they used to be. The cash accusation had been the breaking point for Dwayne. "She's done smaller things," he told me, keeping his voice even. Things where I thought, maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe she's just stressed. But $400 in front of my mother, in front of Dale. And the way she cried. He shook his head. She knew exactly what she was doing. I asked him what he wanted out of this. He looked at me directly and said, "I want someone with actual standing to use what I have. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have any connection to your property or your documents. But you do. And if my photograph of that receipt is useful to you, I want you to use it. What about your relationship with your brother-in-law, with Marcus?" Dwayne thought about that. Marcus is a decent person who married the wrong woman and has been convinced over several years that his own judgment can't be trusted unless she confirms it. I don't blame him the way I blame her, and I think when he sees what she's actually done, he'll be someone worth knowing again. I thought that was a fair assessment. I told Dwayne that his photograph, combined with the financial records and the property documentation, constituted a significant body of evidence. I told him Vivian would likely want a written statement from him. He said he would provide one. He said he would put it in writing and sign it in front of a notary. "My sister plays a long game," he said as we were leaving. "She counts on people not noticing until it's too late. She forgot that some of us were paying attention." He picked up the check before I could reach for it. I let him. Vivian Marsh had an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like very good coffee and old paper, which is exactly the combination you want from an attorney's office. She was in her early 60s, precise, and had the manner of a woman who had heard every variety of human foolishness and had stopped being surprised by any of it. Nora had introduced us by phone the week before. When I walked into her office with the manila envelope and sat down across from her desk, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Let's see what we have." We spread everything on the conference table, the property deed and mortgage documents showing my co-ownership status, the wire transfer records showing my $65,000 down payment contribution, the tuition payment records, all 4 years, $187,000, documented to the penny, the wedding expense contributions, the financial records Darren had compiled showing the credit card in Marcus's name, the transfers to the outside account, the spending patterns, Dwayne's written and notarized statement, his photograph of the receipt from Lila's Curios. Vivian went through everything without speaking. She took notes in a narrow, precise hand. She asked me 2 questions about the property ownership structure. She asked me one question about the timing of the dinner relative to the credit card activity. When she was done, she took her glasses off and set them on the table. "You have more than enough," she said. "I want to file 2 actions. First, a legal notice to Marcus regarding the property. Given your co-ownership standing and the documented financial misuse affecting that account, we have grounds to compel a resolution of the property's stake. Second, a formal letter to Marcus outlining the fraudulent credit card account and the financial transfers, with the documentation attached." She paused. "This is not going to be a comfortable process for your son." "I know," I said. "Are you prepared for that?" I looked at the pile of documents on that table. 26 years of receipts. Every needle, every late night, every missed night of sleep, every gown that left my apartment in a garment bag in someone else's arms. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Vivian put her glasses back on. Then let's begin. It took 10 days for the paperwork to be prepared, reviewed, and filed. Vivian was thorough. She wanted nothing challengeable. She was the kind of attorney who assumed the other side would look for any crack, and so she sealed every crack before the other side had a chance. During those 10 days, I continued living my life. I sewed. I had dinner with Nora twice. I called Darren. I did not call Marcus. He did not call me. The formal notice was served to Marcus at his office. Vivian had chosen to do it that way deliberately, not at the apartment where Priscilla might intercept it or contextualize it before Marcus had a chance to read it clearly, but at his workplace, where he would be alone with the documents and his own thoughts. The letter outlined, in the careful language of legal correspondence, the following: that as a co-owner of the property, I retained specific legal rights, that documented financial misuse of an account connected to the property had occurred, that a credit card in his name had been opened without his apparent knowledge and carried a significant balance, and that the supporting documentation was attached in full. 17 pages, plus Dwayne's notarized statement, plus the photograph of the receipt from Lila's Curios. Nora called me the evening after it was served. She had heard from Vivian, who had heard from the process server. He signed for it himself, Nora said, stood there and read the cover letter right there in the lobby. How did he look? I asked. Nora paused, like someone who's just been shown something they didn't want to know was true. 2 nights later, at 8:47 in the evening, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole first, the habit of a woman who lives alone. Marcus was standing in the hallway. He was still in his work clothes, the gray slacks and blue button-down he'd been wearing at the office when the papers were served, apparently. His tie was gone. He looked like he had not slept. His face had a hollowed-out quality that I recognized because I had seen it once before, the day of his father's funeral. I opened the door. He started to say something and then stopped. He started again. Mom. His voice had the roughness of someone who has been either crying or fighting it for hours. How could you... He stopped. He looked at his shoes. I don't even know how to start. Come in, I said. He came in. I did not offer him coffee. I sat down in the chair by the window. He sat on the small sofa and looked at his hands. Priscilla told me, he said, about the credit card. I found the statements. They were in a drawer in the bedroom, the ones she'd been intercepting from the mail, and I confronted her, and she said... He stopped. He pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. She said the pendant wasn't her mother's. She bought it at a boutique. She put it in your coat on purpose. He couldn't look at me. She said she wanted me to herself. Said she'd felt like you were always... that there was no room for you in the life she wanted. She said if I was, in her words, a real man, I would have... His voice broke. Would have cut you off a long time ago. The room was quiet. I let it be quiet for a while, because there was a lot in that room that needed space. Then Marcus looked up, and his eyes were wet, and he said, Mom, I believed her. I threw you out of a house you bought. I stood there and let her do that to you, and I believed her. Yes, I said. You did. I'm so sorry. I know you are. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I've lost everything. She's gone. She left 2 days ago. I don't know where. There's over $11,000 on a card I didn't even know existed. She co-signed my name to things I never saw. The apartment, the legal notice from your lawyer about the property. I know, I said. That letter is accurate. He nodded, a small, defeated nod. I know. I read all of it. I read every page. He looked at me. Mom, I didn't know it was this much. What you spent on me. What you put in for the apartment. I knew you'd helped, But the actual numbers, get the folder, I said. He looked confused. What? There's a manila folder on the kitchen counter. Bring it here. He brought it. He sat back down on the sofa and held it and looked at it. Open it, I said. He opened it slowly. The first page was the tuition record. 4 years of payment summaries, each one itemized. He read the first one, then the second. By the third, his hands were not quite steady. He got to the final tally, $187,000, and stopped. Mom, he said, keep going. The wedding contributions were next, $65,000. Venue deposits, catering installments, the photographer, the florist. I had paid for most of their wedding because Priscilla's family could not, and Marcus had asked me, and I had said yes without hesitation because that is what you do for your child. Then the apartment, the down payment, $65,000 in wire transfers, plus the mortgage co-signing, the closing costs I had covered, the property taxes I had contributed to for the first 3 years. I watched him do the math. I could see when he arrived at the total. He set the folder down on his knees. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Almost $600,000, I said quietly. Over 26 years, while I lived here, in this apartment, eating eggs and oatmeal to keep the grocery bill down, while my back bent over a sewing machine that belonged to your grandmother. I didn't know, he whispered. Didn't know or didn't look. He stayed silent. That was its own answer. I let it sit there between us. I did not rush to fill it. Finally, I said, "You are not a bad man, Marcus. You are a man who was very carefully managed by a skilled woman, and you let yourself be managed because it was easier than paying attention. That is what you have to live with." I leaned forward slightly. "But you are also a man who stood in his own living room and screamed at his mother in front of her daughter-in-law's family and called her a thief. And that is something you cannot take back. Once those words exist, they exist." He lowered his head. "I know." "Good," I said. "Because what comes next depends on whether you understand that." I stood up and went to the cabinet by the kitchen doorway. I took out a second copy of the documents. I had made 3 sets because I was not about to be caught without backup again. And I set them on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at them. "Here is what I am willing to do," I said. "I will withdraw the lawsuit. I will not pursue the property claim through the courts." He looked up, startled. "But there is a condition." He waited. "You will sell the apartment, voluntarily. You will take what it sells for. You will pay off every debt she left in your name, the credit card, the car loan, anything else that surfaces. And you will use what remains to buy something smaller, something that actually corresponds to what you earn on your own income. No cosigners, no parental contributions. You figure out what your salary allows for and you live inside that number." He started to say something. I raised my hand. "I am not finished. You will do this entirely on your own. I will not help financially. I will not co-sign anything. I will not lend you money, give you money, or be your safety net. You are a grown man with an engineering salary, and it is past time you lived accordingly." The room was quiet. "When you have done that," I said, "when you are living inside your own means and paying your own way, then we can talk about rebuilding what we have. But this time, it will be built on something real, not on what I've given you, but on who you actually are." Marcus was quiet for a long time. He looked at the folder. He looked at the documents on the coffee table. He looked at his hands. "The apartment?" he said finally. "If I sell it and pay everything off, I won't have much left. I'd have to move somewhere smaller, farther out." I looked at him steadily. "Welcome to my last 26 years, I said. He flinched, just slightly, but he did not argue. "There's one more thing," I said, "about Priscilla. Dwayne is prepared to make a formal complaint against her if you want to pursue it. The financial fraud with the credit card is something you could report. That is your decision to make, not mine." He thought about that. "Should I?" "That," I said, "is entirely up to you. She's going to find her own consequences. People like her always do. Whether you want to be the one to initiate them is something only you can decide." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Mom, will you forgive me?" I looked at my son, the man who had once been the boy who fell asleep to the sound of the sewing machine, the boy who had said, "I'll buy you a big house someday so you never have to work so hard," who had meant it, once, with everything he had. "Yes," I said. "Because you are my son and I am your mother, and that does not stop being true just because things get hard. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. You understand that?" He nodded. "Yes. Then go home. Sleep. Tomorrow you start putting things right. When you need to talk, you can call me. But not for money, not for a loan, not for a co-signature, not for any of it. You call me when you want to talk." He stood. He hugged me. It was not the hug of a man performing reconciliation. It was the hug of someone who understood, for the first time in a long time, how much he had to be sorry for. I returned it. Then I stepped back. "Go," I said. "Start." He went. I closed the door behind him, and then I leaned against it, and I let myself cry. Not the hot, despairing tears from the bus that Sunday 3 months ago. Different tears. The kind that come when something that has been held very tightly for a very long time finally releases. I cried for a while. Then I washed my face. Then I went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept the whole night through. The apartment sold in 4 months. Not as fast as Marcus had hoped, but he priced it fairly and staged it himself. Borrowed a friend's furniture, cleaned every corner, showed it on weekends. And when the offer came in at $385,000, he took it without negotiating for more, because he had learned something about the difference between what you want and what's reasonable. He paid off $11,000 in credit card debt. He paid $8,000 on a car loan that Priscilla had apparently run up in his name for a vehicle she had since taken out of state. He covered the closing costs and the real estate commission and the taxes. What remained? Just under $290,000. He used as a down payment on a 2-bedroom place 40 minutes outside the city. Smaller, quieter. His. He did all of this himself. He called me 3 times during the process. Once to tell me the offer had come in, once to ask a procedural question about the closing documents that I referred him to Vivian for, and once to tell me it was done. That third call, his voice was different, steadier, like someone who had done something genuinely difficult and was standing on the other side of it. I withdrew the lawsuit the day the sale closed. Vivian sent me a final invoice that I paid promptly. She sent a note along with the receipt that said, simply, "Good outcome." I said to Nora afterward that I thought that was the highest praise Vivian was capable of offering, and Nora said yes, probably. As for Priscilla, I heard through Dwayne that she had gone to stay with a cousin in another state. Dwayne had filed a complaint with local police about the cash accusation, not because he expected much to come of it, but because he wanted it documented. Marcus had also reported the fraudulent credit card account to the bank and to the relevant authorities. Whether anything formal would come of any of that was not something I spent time thinking about. People like Priscilla carry their own accounting. It follows them. I did not need to be part of delivering it. Dolores, Priscilla's mother, called me once, about 2 months after everything came out. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying she hadn't known, that she was so sorry that she hoped I could find it in my heart. I did not call her back. I do not hold her responsible for what her daughter did, but I also don't have the bandwidth to manage her guilt. She has children for that. Dwayne and I had lunch again in the fall. He is rebuilding his own relationship with the parts of his family he still has. He is doing fine. And me? I took on an apprentice. Her name is Celestine, and she is 24 years old and attends my church and has the most natural eye for proportion of anyone I have ever taught. She comes to my apartment on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and I show her what took me 30 years to figure out: how to read a bias cut, how to press seams so they lie flat without shine, how to look at a bride and understand what shape she's actually in versus what shape she's afraid she's in. It turns out I have more to give than I thought. It's just that, for a long time, I was giving it all in one direction. 3 months after the apartment sold, Marcus started coming on Sunday afternoons. He brings things: a loaf of bread from the bakery near his office, a small container of the soup he's learning to make, which started out thin and too salty, and is now actually quite good. He brings these things, and he sits at my kitchen table, and we talk. Really talk. Not the conversations we'd had for the last several years, which were careful and surface level and managed. We talk about his father sometimes. We talk about what Marcus is working on at his job, which is more interesting than I'd realized. He's working on a drainage infrastructure project for a mid-sized city 3 states over, and there is apparently a great deal of complexity involved in making sure water goes where it's supposed to go instead of where it wants to go. I find I am genuinely interested in this. He is learning things that I had long ago stopped expecting him to know. He has learned to cook because no one else will do it for him. He has learned to do his own laundry properly, not just shoving everything in together and hoping. He knows when the furnace filter needs to be changed and how much it costs to have it done and whether it's worth doing himself. These sound like small things. They are not small things. They are the building materials of an actual life. One Sunday afternoon in January, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," he said, "I want to say something." I waited. "I think about what you did. Not the lawsuit, not the documents, all of that. I mean what you did before any of it. The work, all those years. I think about it differently now." He looked at me. "I used to think it was just what you did. What mothers do. I didn't understand it as a choice, as something that cost you." He squeezed my hand. "I understand it now." I looked at my son. He had lost 30 pounds since the divorce proceedings began and had gained them back differently. Muscle, mostly, from a habit of running in the mornings that he'd picked up in the fall. He looked more like his father than he had in years. "That's all I ever wanted," I said. "For you to understand it." He nodded. We sat for a while. The coffee went from hot to warm to cool. Outside the window, the city did what it always does, moved and made noise and continued without waiting for anyone. I told him once, in the early weeks of all this, that I did not regret the sacrifices. I meant that, and I still mean it. I regret that it took what it took for certain things to become clear. I regret that my son had to be broken somewhat before he could be rebuilt more solidly. But the sacrifices themselves, the years, the work, the late nights, the sewing machine humming in the dark, those I do not regret. They were mine. I chose them. What I know now, that I did not know clearly enough before, is this. Dignity is not something anyone can take from you. It can be tested. It can be attacked. Someone can stage an elaborate performance in front of a whole room of people with the specific intention of stripping you of it, and you can walk out of that room feeling like you have lost everything. But if you know who you are and you know what you are owed and you refuse to collapse, then they have not taken a thing. Priscilla stood in that living room with a pendant she'd bought for $230 from a boutique downtown, and she thought she was ending something. She was beginning something. She just didn't know it was not in her favor. My name is Josephine. I am 68 years old. I have rough hands and a curved back and a small apartment that I know every corner of. My sewing machine hums by the window every morning in the winter light. I would not trade a single stitch of it, and I mean that. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes One word is enough to say you were here.